How did you end up at Facebook?
I had known a guy who was at the time the founding president, Sean Parker. And Parker and I had known each other in the kind of that 2000 to 2005 or 6 timeframe.
When you got to Silicon Valley?
Yeah. He was running a business called Napster when I was at Winamp. We were all in the same circles. None of us had made it, right? And he brought Mark and himself to Washington, D.C., where AOL was headquartered, Dulles, Virginia, actually, just outside Washington, D.C. Had a meeting with them. And I went and I told Jim Bankoff, I remember this, who now runs Vox Media, but at the time ran AOL's audience business. I said, we should really try to buy this company. And Bankoff said, there's just no chance in hell you can buy this business.
Because?
Just the capitalization structure of AOL Time Warner at the time, and just the downward pressure on the stock. And it was a very turbulent time. People were getting fired all the time. There was a lot of management churn. And so in that moment, he and then Kevin said, look, see if there's an operating deal to be done. And we did a deal where we integrated Facebook and AIM together. And then very quickly thereafter, Sean exited Facebook, and Mark called me to unwind the deal. And at the end of that process, he said, you should really think about working here. And then I kind of met the other senior guys, and I said, yeah, let's take a shot. And,
why? Because you hadn't ever worked for a really small outfit before. I mean,
yeah.
You went into this prestigious technology company in Canada and cut your teeth there. I mean, yet you were doing derivatives trading for a bank, decided, yeah, it was going to eat your soul, so you wouldn't continue to work there, but it was big. You ended up at AOL, which was huge at the time. What gave you the guts to go with this little company run by this I mean, maybe he wasn't a teenager anymore, but just barely.
I think he was 19.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Gut decision? One of the few that works out?
No, actually, it was about risk management. I remember thinking to myself, I had left AOL at the time, and I'd been recruited to work at a venture firm, Mayfield. And I was getting paid what felt to me like all the money in the world at the time. I'm happy to tell you, $250,000 a year, huge amount of money for me. This was like line of sight to, getting completely out of student debt, getting my parents completely sort of like into a situation where they could afford a house, help subsidizing some of my sisters. And I had been, half my paycheck every year until that, every year was going back to my family. So it's not like I even was able to celebrate any of the trappings of anything, because take my salary, divide it by 2 for taxes, then divide it by 2 again, and that was my effective salary. So in any event, I remember thinking to myself, okay, well, here's what my expected value is at Mayfield over the next 5 years. And I said, what is the distribution of outcomes at Facebook? And I basically, most of the scenarios were less than it. But there were a few scenarios where I could make a case that it could be equivalent to what I would make at Mayfield over a 4-year period, and in a very, very small number of cases where it would be in excess. And I said, okay, the mathematical answer is that it's probably easier to just stay where I am. And then I said to myself, but if I can go there, and if this thing does fail, so meaning the outcome is in one of those kind of like equivalent or worse situations, what will I still have? And what I said to myself was, I will have met some of the smartest people in the world, and I'll be in the game. And I will have learned something about myself, of whether I can do something at a really early stage scale, and whether can I do this on my own. Am I sort of like, have I been trained now, and am I ready to execute? And so I took the shot for most of those reasons. And what was funny at the time was I actually had an offer, or somebody was recruiting me to be CEO of a business.
What kind of business?
It's like some internet business. I can't even quite honestly remember. I just remember getting called, thinking to myself, wow, maybe I could be the chief versus the Indian. But when I spent time with the team at Facebook, I was like, wow, this is kind of fun, and nobody knows what they're doing. And I thought that's probably a place where I can learn something. And so
even if it fails.
Even if
so
it
maybe
fails.
The lesson from the whole Winamp AOL experience, sometimes what you learn from the failure is just as important as winning. And you calculated that what you would learn at Facebook?
Yeah, and also, John, quite honestly, I was like, look, I've never really been around something that has succeeded. So I mean, I know what failure feels like, and it feels okay. I mean, it's not life-threatening. Like, life goes on. Like, you try some stuff, some works, some doesn't. You're subject to market conditions, you're subject to internal politics, and I had kind of become relatively resilient, and I just thought, how much worse could it be than that? And so I was like, yeah, I'll probably learn a lot. It seemed like it was the next arc after AIM and ICQ to me, right? Because I had been so deep in that business where I could tell, like, there was something that Facebook was scratching the surface on, especially in a world post-MySpace and post-Friendster that was really unique. It had just started to figure out how to experiment with algorithmic feeds. And so there was enough surface material there where I was like, I'm going to learn a ton. And I just thought...
This former card-counting teenager, former derivatives trader, always been comfortable with numbers and calculating risks, end up in this position with Facebook, which is the biggest data problem, post-Google of a generation.
Absolutely.
And you end up in the position of
Absolutely.
chief growth hacker.
Yeah.
You're tackling the kinds of problems having to do with people and outcomes that the technology world has never really wrestled with before.
Never. No, and in fact, I think what we're learning now is how complicated and nuanced these issues really are. When I created the growth team, I said, okay, basically what I wanted to do was tell a bunch of smarty pants Ivy League graduates who I worked with that they didn't know what they were talking about. And I took great pride in that. And I just used data and just basically told them to pound sand and shut up.
But one of those smarty pants Ivy League people was Mark Zuckerberg himself.
Yeah, although to his credit, he really wasn't, because he dropped out after 9 months.
Right.
And he was actually open to the truth, more so in a way of anybody that I've ever seen. He loves the truth. But again, in success, you get a lot of people that conflate luck and skill. And in the early days of Facebook, there were many of those people.